What do we mean, exactly, when we talk about misuse of energy? Well, in Atlantis, just like today, it's done in many different ways, but mostly through advanced technology and misuse of sexual energies. There is nothing wrong with technology, if we wish to remain an advanced society who wants some kind of assistance with managing our basic needs on a comfortable level. Certain technology can be beneficial. Some say the washing machine is the greatest invention of mankind. I don't know if I agree, but I can't really argue with it either. It is a great invention. There are other great inventions that mankind could take advantage of. Many of them were developed by Nikola Tesla, whose inventions were taken over and misused by the government. However, some researchers have started to look into Tesla some more and have begun to take off the God spell of this man by showing that Tesla to some larger or lesser degree was working with the government on some not so benevolent projects. Time will tell to what extent that may have been. When technology is being used to control others, for warfare, spying, and mind control etc., or only accessible to a few selected groups, it's starting to get misused. With Sirians present, this has a tendency to always happen. It's up to we humans to see through their manipulation, or we will end up in a much worse situation than the Atlanteans did. At least they were stopped by the flood, or we would probably not be here today. I am not excusing how Enlil manipulated events to create the deluge. I am just saying that when the Sirians have a finger in things, they really go out of hand after a while. It always seems inevitable. This is why I don't trust them, in spite of what people say. In Atlantis, the technology was a little different from the one we are using today, but there are also similarities. We have already mentioned the computers, but they also had space technology, of course, and a wealth of knowledge about the stars and the universe in general. They fed off fear, and in addition to setting up the grid and the trap system, they also used technology to control people's minds and their thoughts. A relatively small population, which yet hadn't reached 1 billion, was much easier to control than today's 7 billion people. They taught humans about warfare and instigated wars to create mass events which the Sirians could energetically feed off. Sometimes the wars were for that purpose only, and sometimes it was over real estate, or some petty conflict between Sirian/Anunnaki authorities. This was nothing new. The Sirians, or Anunnaki just like we humans, couldn't even be peaceful with each other, and conflicts and wars were very common. Just like Zecharia Sitchin so well describes in his book, The Wars of Gods and Men, they used human soldiers as cannon fodder for their silly wars, which sometimes could start because of jealousy between gods, or just as a show-off, who was the most powerful and fearless. The jealousy between the gods of Sirius is well documented, so we don't need to go into details here. We know that crystals had a lot to do with it, because crystals, especially the ones they called mes, pronounced mesh, contain memory and knowledge. They were also a communication device between gods, almost like today's cell phones, but they worked on longer distances. Today's cell phone is watered-down Atlantean technology, by the way, but we can see how quickly our cell phones get more and more advanced, like if someone has epiphanies after epiphanies and invents new technology on a weekly basis. Of course, this is not the case. The cell phone technology, the way it's intended to be used in the future, is already fully developed since long. In fact, it's not human inventions, but achieved via TTP, technology transfer programs. In the Atlantean times, the gods fought over these devices to steal knowledge from each other and to get access to each other's secrets. It was such a big deal that people got killed over them, as discussed in details in Level 1. In contrast to Enlil, Lord Ea was somewhat pleased with his own and the Pleiadians' creation of giants. They were impressive and could be used for both labor, teaching, military purposes, and to rule. More and more so, Ea started putting pure-blooded human hybrids to rule over some smaller kingdoms. However, as time went by, some of these kings showed to be quite skilled in warfare, and were quite curious explorers. While the kingdoms of Atlantis had formed over the millennia, other tribes, which Ea had told to spread out over the world, had formed their own cities and kingdoms in different parts of the planet, mostly minding their own business. However, as we have discussed earlier, fear is something the Sirians feed off, and it became important to instigate these kinds of survival emotions in ignorant humans, who didn't have the wisdom of shamans and high priests/priestesses. The problem with elitism is that power corrupts, so the Lemurian cultures, or many of them, were quite unique in the sense that they could still keep a good relationship between the priesthood and the people. Not so in many other parts of the world, where it was more an exception than a rule that this unique relationship prevailed. Soon enough, and as a part of the plan, the shamanic leadership started taking advantage of the power they felt they had due to the knowledge and wisdom they possessed and began campaigns to dumb down the people. This was part of EA's genius. He understood the human mindset, because he had created it. Hence, he didn't have to be there for this particular elitism to develop, it became a natural process on the most part. By whispering secrets to a chosen few, they automatically felt they were God's chosen people, and therefore for more than the rest of mankind. When this was achieved, fear, uncertainty, and confusion could be instigated into these societies. The priesthoods told the people that there were dangers out there in the woods, other tribes were hostile and could any time come and kill or kidnap you, there were monsters and unseen forces everywhere who could engulf you, and the list goes on. People became quite superstitious and gave their power away to the priesthood, who became their protectors from evil. The priesthood became more powerful, and this power in its turn was used by the Sirians, who stole it from the priesthood by feeding off the vibrations of fear amongst the general people, and by sucking energy from the priesthood, only to let them keep enough to feel they were for more than the people. Then, when this basic structure was in place, the rest was easy. The kings, whether they were direct hybrid sons of Ea, or hybrids of the second or third generation, could easily manipulate the masses. And the best way to feed off fear and terror is through warfare and conquest. Thus, wars and conflicts became commonplace, and the Atlantic Empire with its 10 major kingdoms started conquering other parts of the world to expand their domains. Thus, parts of today's Egypt and Western Europe were conquered and fell under the banner of the Atlantic kings. Already existing cities or kingdoms were either totally destroyed and everyone was killed or driven off, or they surrendered and became part of Atlantis, many of the conquered people becoming slaves under the Atlantean kings. In addition to the above, grotesque and horrific rituals were performed by the Sirians, many times as revenge when one Sirian family was in dispute with another, or just to show off their power.